The first time he called me trash, it wasn't whispered under his breath. It was loud, clear, sharp enough that even the elderly couple seated near the gate turned their heads in shock. There I was, clutching my boarding pass with slightly trembling hands, standing at the airport gate like everyone else. I was nervous, exhausted from barely sleeping the night before, but ready to board my flight. Suddenly, this man in an expensive tailored suit, dripping with arrogance, shoved past me. His cologne hit me before his words did. Icy, pungent, the kind of scent people wear to make you feel small. He sneered, glanced at my worn-out sneakers, and then laughed. People like you shouldn't even be allowed in first class. You're lowering the standards here. My throat tightened. I hadn't even said a word to him. I was just existing, waiting. And yet, in front of dozens of strangers, he made me feel like I didn't belong. But here's the thing about moments like these. They either crush you or light a fire in you. That insult didn't just sting, it ignited something I didn't even know was buried inside me. Because little did this so-called rich man know, he had just messed with the wrong person at the wrong time. My mind went blank for a moment. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, but my lips froze. The gate agent looked uncomfortable, other passengers pretended not to hear, and he just strutted forward like he owned the place. That was the type of man he was. Someone who believed money gave him the right to humiliate strangers. But if he thought I would just stay silent, he had no idea who he was dealing with. I kept my composure, though inside I was shaking. Not just from humiliation, but from the bubbling storm of anger rising in my chest. Something about the way he smirked as if he had already won made me want to wipe that arrogance off his face. Permanently. I watched him drop his designer briefcase onto a seat and talk loudly into his phone. He kept bragging about his multi-million-dollar deal, making sure everyone around him could hear. He was one of those men who needed an audience, who thrived on making others feel small so he could feel bigger. And as he barked into his phone, tossing more insults at me in between calls, like I was nothing but airport scenery, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let this slide. That day, standing in that gate area, humiliated and burning inside, I made a silent promise to myself. He would regret ever crossing paths with me. The boarding announcement echoed through the speakers, snapping me back to reality. People stood, stretched, and lined up. My heart raced as I stared at his arrogant silhouette moving toward the gate. He thought he was about to board his flight without a problem. But he didn't know that his life, his schedule, his important plans were about to change forever. Because I wasn't just going to sit there and let him humiliate me. No, I was going to make him miss his flight, forever. And I already had the perfect idea forming in my mind. My name is Clara Jennings. I'm 26 years old, born and raised in a small coastal town where everyone knew each other's secrets before you even learned them yourself. My father was a fisherman, and my mother worked long hours at a diner. We never had much, but what we lacked in money, we tried to make up for in grit. Growing up, I learned quickly what it meant to be overlooked. At school, kids with the newest backpacks and shiny shoes laughed at my hand-me-downs. Teachers paid more attention to the promising students whose parents donated to the PTA. And at home, while I loved my family, I often carried a silent weight, knowing my parents worried if they could even pay the electricity bill each month. That's why being at that airport, holding a first-class boarding pass in my hand, was more than just a seat on a plane. It was a symbol, proof that all my late nights, all the studying, all the sacrifices, I had finally made it somewhere. I had just landed a position at an international firm in London, a job I fought tooth and nail for. This flight wasn't just a trip. It was the first step into the life I'd been chasing for years. So when that man, his name I later overheard was Victor Langston, mocked me like I didn't belong there, it hit deeper than he could ever imagine. He wasn't just insulting my sneakers. He was insulting every ounce of sweat and determination that had gotten me to that very moment. Victor, with his slicked back hair and smug grin, looked like the kind of man who had never worked a hard day in his life. Every word he spoke dripped with superiority. As I stood there, replaying his sneer in my head, my stomach twisted. Not because I believed him, but because he reminded me of every person who had once made me feel small. I remembered being 15, carrying trays at the diner to help my mom, when a wealthy tourist once waved a $20 bill in front of my face and said, "Run along, sweetheart, and don't drop my order." His laugh had been nearly identical to Victor's. That same cruel sharpness. That same belief that people like me existed only to serve people like him. I clenched my fists at the memory. No. Not this time. I wasn't 15 anymore. And Victor Langston wasn't going to walk away thinking he could humiliate me and face no consequence. The funny thing was, he was making it too easy for me. He talked so loudly, so carelessly, that I began catching details of his life he clearly thought no one was listening to. He boasted to his assistant over the phone about a critical deal he had to seal overseas. He ranted about time zones, schedules, and Hoenn. "Woo, this flight cannot be missed, or everything falls apart." My eyes narrowed. Every arrogant syllable leaving his mouth was giving me information. Information I could use. And that's when the plan started taking shape. Not reckless, not impulsive, but sharp, calculated. If Victor thought his wealth gave him power, then I'd use his own arrogance against him. Because this time, I wouldn't just take his insult. I would take his flight. And soon, he wouldn't even see it coming. The boarding line stretched out like a snake across the gate. People shuffled forward, passports in hand, anxious to settle into their seats. I stayed back a little, pretending to double-check my documents while keeping Victor Langston firmly in my sight. His impatience was palpable. He tapped his Rolex against his briefcase, muttering to the gate agent about priority boarding. "Excuse me," Victor snapped, his voice cutting through the crowd like a blade. "I pay for premium service. I don't wait behind this." He gestured vaguely to the passengers ahead of him, as though we were obstacles, not people. The agent gave a polite, strained smile. "Sir, we'll begin boarding first class in just a moment." Victor groaned loudly, drawing more attention to himself. "Unbelievable. I should have taken my private jet. This is beneath me." I felt my chest tighten. My body wanted to shrink away, to avoid the embarrassment of being near him. But then I remembered why I was there, why I couldn't let this slide. So I stepped forward, deliberately close enough that my shoulder brushed his suit jacket. His cologne burned my nose, but I refused to flinch. "You know," I said evenly, "you could try speaking to people like they're human beings. Might make your wait a little easier." Victor turned slowly, his eyes scanning me with the same disdain he'd shown before. He smirked. Trash sneakers. Still here. Tell me, sweetheart, did you borrow money just to sit in first class? Because you're not fooling anyone." My face heated, but I held his gaze. "No," I replied sharply. "I earned my ticket. Something you probably wouldn't understand." That jab landed. His smirk faltered for half a second before twisting into an ugly grin. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Listen, little girl. People like me build the world. People like you, clean it. Remember your place." My stomach churned, but instead of recoiling, I smiled sweetly. "Funny, because from where I'm standing, you seem pretty desperate to get on this plane. Almost like your whole world might fall apart if you miss it." His eyes flickered. Just a second, but I caught it. He wasn't as untouchable as he pretended to be. Before he could respond, the announcement came. "Now boarding first-class passengers for Flight 732 to London." Victor straightened, brushing past me with a snort. "Out of my way." He shoved his boarding pass at the agent, already barking into his phone about contracts and deadlines. But I wasn't discouraged. That one flicker of fear in his eyes told me everything. His arrogance was a mask, but beneath it lay something fragile, something I could break. As I watched him walk down the jet bridge, I made my decision. If Victor Langston thought money gave him the power to crush people like me, I'd show him a power he couldn't buy, the power of losing everything in the blink of an eye. Because I wasn't going to just confront him with words, I was going to ruin his plans. And I already knew the first step, making sure Victor Langston never sat comfortably in that first-class seat. The hum of the airport buzzed around me, but my focus was sharp, locked on one man, Victor Langston. He strutted down the jet bridge with all the arrogance in the world, convinced nothing and no one could slow him down. But arrogance is a weakness, and I knew exactly how to use it. I lingered at the gate until most passengers had boarded. The gate agent, a young woman with tired eyes, glanced at me. Ma'am, are you boarding now? I nodded, then leaned in slightly. Actually, I think there might be a problem. That man who just went through, Victor Langston? He dropped this. I held up a sleek black wallet I'd seen him wave around earlier when paying for his overpriced airport espresso. Only, it wasn't his wallet. It was mine. Plain, worn, but conveniently similar in shape and size. I'd swapped the moment we brushed shoulders in line. His arrogance made him careless. The agent frowned, taking it from me. Oh, thank you. We'll return it to him on board. Of course, I said with a polite smile, hiding the adrenaline surging in my veins. But maybe you should double-check his ID before you hand it back. Security's pretty strict these days, right? The suggestion planted. Subtle, innocent, but enough to spark protocol. I walked calmly down the jet bridge, heart hammering. By the time I stepped into the plane, I saw the first flicker of chaos unfolding. Victor stood near his seat in first class, his face flushed red as the flight attendant held his actual wallet in her hands. "This is absurd," he barked, his voice echoing through the cabin. "That is my wallet. Someone must have tampered with it." The attendant looked flustered. "Sir, your boarding pass doesn't match the ID we just checked. Until this is resolved, we can't let you remain on board." Gasps and whispers rippled through the nearby passengers. Victor's mask of control began to crack. He slammed his briefcase onto the seat, startling a woman across the aisle. "Do you know who I am? I have a multi-million-dollar contract waiting for me in London. You can't do this." I slipped into my seat a few rows behind him, keeping my head down. My pulse raced, but a slow, triumphant smile crept across my face. The mighty Victor Langston, reduced to shouting at a flight attendant like a child denied candy. But this was just the beginning. The captain's voice broke through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be experiencing a slight delay due to a passenger issue. Please remain seated." Victor spun in frustration, his eyes sweeping over the cabin. For a terrifying second, I thought his gaze locked on me. But he dismissed me just as quickly, too consumed by his own rage to see the quiet storm he'd created for himself. He demanded to speak to a supervisor, to the airline manager, to anyone who would listen. But every second he wasted arguing was another second ticking away from his precious schedule. I could practically see the panic clawing at him beneath his forced bravado. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just going to make him miss his flight. I was going to make sure Victor Langston's world unraveled, piece by arrogant piece. The question was, how far was I willing to go? Victor's voice thundered through the cabin, echoing off the narrow walls like a storm refusing to quiet. "This is ridiculous! I have the correct ID, the correct ticket. Someone's clearly trying to sabotage me. Do you have any idea what you're costing me?" The flight attendant, a tall man with a clipped tone, stayed calm. "Sir, we simply need to confirm your identification. Until then, please step aside so we can finish boarding." But Victor didn't step aside. He slammed his palm against the overhead bin, rattling it so hard a few passengers flinched. "I am not stepping aside. I will not be treated like some common criminal." Gasps rippled. A mother clutched her child closer. Phones appeared, subtle but obvious. Passengers recording the spectacle. Victor didn't notice. His pride blinded him. And me? I sat 2 rows back, hidden behind the seat in front of me, the corner of my mouth twitching into the smallest of smirks. The cracks were widening. His perfect, untouchable mask was breaking right in front of strangers with cameras. I leaned slightly into the aisle, catching the flight attendant's eye. "Excuse me," I said softly, voice filled with just the right concern. "I think I saw him earlier, yelling at one of the staff near the gate. He seemed really agitated." The attendant's brows knit together. He nodded faintly before turning back to Victor. "Sir, if you don't calm down, we'll have no choice but to call security." That single word, security, lit Victor's temper like gasoline. "Security?" He laughed harshly, his voice sharp enough to sting. "Do you even know who I am? I'll have your job by tomorrow morning." I watched the scene unfold, the balance of power shifting. The more he fought, the more guilty he looked. Every arrogant word dug his grave deeper, and all I had to do was sit there, anonymous, invisible, watching him collapse under the weight of his own pride. But then something unexpected happened. His phone buzzed on the seat beside him, the screen lighting up with a name. Mr. Calder, London office. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know it was important. His entire frantic trip revolved around this deal, and from the look on his face as he picked up, it was already slipping through his fingers. "I'm on the plane now," Victor lied, voice tight with desperation. "There's just a minor delay. Don't worry, I'll be there. Don't—" His words cut off. His expression shifted from irritation to panic. His jaw clenched. No, that's not acceptable. Listen to me. If this contract goes to Hastings instead, it will ruin everything." His hand shook as he ended the call. The invincible Victor Langston was trembling. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had called me trash for simply existing, and now here he was, unraveling, reduced to begging and yelling in front of strangers. His entire empire seemed balanced on one flight, one moment, and it was all slipping away. The flight attendant returned with 2 security officers. Their voices were calm but firm. "Sir, you'll need to come with us." Victor froze, his face drained of color. You don't understand. I can't miss this flight." But the officers didn't care. They each took an arm, ignoring his protests, and began leading him back toward the exit. And as he stumbled past my row, shouting and pleading, I sat perfectly still, my gaze cool and unshaken. He never even looked at me. He didn't realize the quiet girl with worn sneakers had orchestrated every piece of his downfall. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. I still had one final move left to make. The entire cabin fell silent as Victor Langston was escorted off the plane, his voice breaking between rage and desperation. "You fools don't understand," he shouted, his shoes dragging against the floor. "This contract, this entire deal, depends on me being there. If I lose this, hundreds of jobs, millions of dollars, gone." But no one pitied him. Passengers whispered, shook their heads, and raised their phones higher to capture every humiliating second. Victor, the man who thrived on being watched, was now the star of a very different kind of performance. I watched him appear through the jet bridge, his voice echoing faintly until the cabin doors closed behind him. And for the first time since he insulted me, I let out a slow, steady breath. The storm inside me began to settle, but not completely. Because this wasn't finished. Not yet. The flight attendants reassured passengers that things would continue shortly. "We apologize for the delay. We'll be departing as soon as the situation is resolved." Resolved. That word echoed in my head. Victor being dragged away was satisfying, yes, but true resolution? That required something more. Something permanent. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the airline's public Wi-Fi login, and with a few quick taps, I found exactly what I needed: the trending feed. Videos of Victor's outburst were already popping up. His name was in the captions. His face, red and twisted with fury, filled the screens of strangers across the globe. But I didn't stop there. I had overheard more than enough from his phone calls earlier: the name of his client, the company, the urgency of the deal. With a few discreet messages, just a couple of pointed comments left on the trending clips, I made sure those details reached the right eyes. Looks like Victor Langston missed his critical London meeting. Wonder if Calder went with Hastings instead. The internet doesn't wait. By the time the plane finally pulled back from the gate, my notifications were already lighting up. The story was spreading. Fast. And I reclined in my seat, closed my eyes, and let the hum of the engines soothe me. Because I knew, without a doubt, that when Victor finally walked out of that airport, his life would look very different. His precious contract would be gone. His reputation, tarnished. And his arrogance, shattered. Hours later, as we soared high above the clouds, the captain made an announcement. "Thank you for your patience during our earlier delay. We've now reached cruising altitude. Enjoy your flight." I couldn't help but smile. Enjoy your flight. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was enjoying mine just fine, while Victor's was over before it even began. And when I landed in London, the headlines confirmed everything. Victor Langston removed from flight after public meltdown. Langston loses multi-million-dollar contract to Hastings. He didn't just miss his flight. He missed his chance. Forever. As I scrolled through the articles, one detail made me laugh out loud in the quiet of my hotel room. Victor had been banned from the airline for aggressive behavior. Banned. The man who claimed private jets were beneath him now had nowhere to run. I leaned back, phone still in my hand, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and peace. Revenge, it turned out, didn't need to be loud. Sometimes it was silent, calculated, and devastating. And Victor Langston? He learned that lesson the hard way. The next morning, I stood by my hotel window in London, looking out at the skyline I had only ever dreamed of as a child. The city pulsed with life. Rushing cars, towering buildings, endless possibilities. My heart felt light, but not just because I had finally arrived. It was because Victor Langston was no longer looming over me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the poor girl with hand-me-down shoes being sneered at. I felt powerful, not because I'd ruined someone's life, but because I had refused to let someone like him define mine. All those years of being underestimated, overlooked, dismissed, they had built something in me stronger than money ever could: resilience. And Victor, with all his wealth and arrogance, had none of it. That's why he crumbled so quickly. His world depended on status. Mine depended on survival. As I sipped my coffee and scrolled through the headlines again, I thought about the look on his face as security led him away. Pure disbelief. He had probably spent his entire life walking over people like me, convinced we'd never fight back. And maybe most didn't. Maybe they swallowed the insults, the humiliation, the shame. But I didn't. And maybe that was the real victory. Not just that Victor missed his flight, not just that he lost his deal, but that he finally came face to face with a truth he couldn't buy his way out of. Money can't shield you from consequences forever. Later that day, I walked into my new office for the first time. The receptionist greeted me warmly, and my manager congratulated me on starting this new chapter. I smiled, but deep down, I carried something more than just professional excitement. I carried proof to myself that no matter how many times the world tried to shove me down, I could stand back up and stand taller. Because in the end, revenge isn't about cruelty. It's about reclaiming your dignity. And sometimes it's about teaching a lesson to those who believe they'll never be taught. I know some people would say I should have just ignored Victor, let his insult roll off my back. But to them I ask, how many times should we stay silent? How many times should we allow arrogance to stomp on us before we finally push back? I pushed back, and I don't regret it for a second. So if you've ever been underestimated, humiliated, or made to feel like you don't belong, remember my story. Remember that sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the sharpest strength. And never forget, even the richest, most powerful-seeming people can fall, especially when their pride becomes their weakness. That day, Victor thought he was untouchable, but I made sure he missed more than just a flight. He missed the illusion of control he had built his whole life on. And me? I walked away free, stronger than ever. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been insulted or underestimated by someone who thought they were better than you? What did you do? Or what would you want to do? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more real stories like mine, and share it with someone who might need the reminder that no matter how small people try to make you feel, you have the power to rise above it. Because sometimes, the sweetest victory is making sure they miss their flight forever.